Good afternoon, Greens, and welcome to How Greens Get Things Done. It has been so long, and I'm so sorry for going so long without a new episode. I've been on the road. It's been a busy summer. I was at the National Annual Meeting of the Green Party. I was at the Democracy Convention in the University of Minneapolis in Minnesota, and then I was visiting family for a week. And so I saw that some people liked the video I posted from the Democracy Convention, David Cobb's rap about how to overcome anti-independent politics propaganda, how to overcome duopoly propaganda, talking about why we are Greens and what that means. So if you found that helpful, if you found that to be a useful rap to talk to people about when you're talking about, why building an independent third party is necessary for the left, is necessary for creating real change, please share that to your friends and comrades and allies. Well, this is a new week, and it is great to be back live. Today is actually my birthday. I turned 38 today, and so I'm thinking about time. That's right. Birthday is a good time to think about time and the nature of time and how we use time. And actually today I want to talk about how time impacts our meetings when we get together as Greens. One of the most important things to keep in mind when you're trying to keep people involved and get people involved at higher levels within your campaign or within your Green Party county organization or your local organization is that people feel like their time is respected and that the time that they put into a meeting is valuable and is valued and that they don't feel like they're wasting time at a meeting. Nobody likes meetings, right? Very, very few people like meetings. But like going to the dentist, right? You don't like to go to the dentist, but you go to the dentist because it's worth it, because you know that if you don't go, you're not going to have the outcomes that you want, right? So what you want are to construct meetings that people feel like are valuable enough to be worth their time, that they're going to take off that evening where they could be, binge watching their favorite TV show or just looking after their life, right? Looking after parents, looking after children, taking care of their home, catching up on their jobs, looking for a job, right? If they're going to take away from any of those high priority activities to come to your meeting, then you want them to have the experience of a meeting that is efficiently organized and that is maximizing the time that they put in. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. 3 components to that. Number 1 is starting your meeting on time and what kind of pre-planning it takes to start your meeting on time. And this also applies to events. Second, I want to talk to you about having timed agendas. Now, if you're having meetings, hopefully you have a written pre-planned agenda that you are using for your committee meetings, your county meetings, your campaign meetings. That's important. I want you to go a step further, and on your itemized agenda, I want you to actually time out how many minutes it's going to take for each item on that agenda. You're not setting it in stone, but agenda items and meetings in general will expand to fill whatever time they are allotted. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. And then, the third thing that I wanted to talk about, maybe there isn't a third thing. The third thing I thought I wanted to talk about was regarding, maybe it's just 2 things. So you know what, if there is a third thing, it'll occur to me while I'm talking to you about the first 2. So let's talk about getting your meeting to start on time. This really has 2 parts, right? And I think that's maybe where my item number 3 came in. Number 1, you as a convener of a meeting, or a person who is volunteering to help out with the meeting, to help set up or to help facilitate. You want to be there as far ahead of time as your schedule allows. So if you've got a meeting that starts at 7 p.m., you want to be on site, ideally, let's say at least 15 minutes ahead of time. That's actually can be cutting it close depending on how much setup you need to do for your meeting. And that's something you need to factor into it, is if you are meeting at a community hall or a library meeting room or somebody's home or at a back room of a restaurant or a cafe, how much time do you need to put into making that space suitable for the meeting that you want to have? Do you need to arrange chairs in a circle? Do you need to bring in additional furniture? Do you need to set up laptops and a projector? Do you need to set up a whiteboard or giant, notepad paper? Markers, all that stuff. All that stuff has to get set up. It takes time. And it can feel like it doesn't take that much time, like it's negligible, but if you're supposed to start at 7 o'clock and 7:10 bleeds into 7:05 and into 7:10, then now you're behind, right? So the first key here is that in order to set up your room early, you need to have access to your room before your actual meeting starts. Now, as I'm saying it and as you're listening to it, I'm sure that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but I cannot tell you how many Green Party meetings I've been to that are supposed to start at, let's say, 7 p.m., but we're not getting access to the room until 7 p.m. It happens all of the time. It gets taken for granted so often, it would drive you crazy. It certainly drives me crazy. So when you book a room, you need to make sure you have access to that room, I would say at least a half an hour before the meeting is scheduled to start. Because the person who's supposed to open up that room for you might not be around when you first arrive. Might take a little while to hunt that person down, or maybe that person lost their keys or whatever. You want to give yourself a little bit of buffer to get that room opened up so you can get access, so you can start setting up everything that you need to for your meeting. If you're doing like a big county meeting, like one of your quarterly, all county business meetings, you might want to get there an hour before if you can, right? If you're going to be setting up lists from the Board of Elections so you can verify people's Green Party registration, you want to have that stuff set up. You want to make sure that's a smooth registration and sign-in process for people as they're coming. Now, this gets into kind of the second part of this, which is if you want to start your meeting at 7, then in your invitation, in your solicitation to people, you should be asking them to show up at, let's say, 10 of, right? So if we're starting a meeting at 7 o'clock, you want them to try to show up at 6:50. And if you can give people a little task like, hey, could you bring some extra pens to the meeting? Or could you bring some extra paper to take notes on? Or can you bring a clipboard? That gives them another reason to show up at the time that you are asking them to show up. It also helps delegate some responsibility to them, which helps build their leadership capacity within your Green Party organization. And maybe it helps you out a little bit. Hopefully it helps you out and the people who are convening the meeting with you to share the load a little bit. So that way you're not, bringing in a bag that's bursting with clipboards and paper and tape and markers and sign-in sheets and name tags and all that stuff. Spread the load, right? Many hands make light work, and it helps strengthen your Green Party organization. So you want to get access to that room, I would say minimum half hour before, right? And ideally earlier than that. You want to get there as soon as you are able to get access to it, and then you want to start setting up, and then you're going to have your super greens, your volunteers showing up around, let's say, quarter till, 10 minutes till, and then you want as many people as possible to show up before the meeting start time, and that way you can start when you said you're going to start. And people are going to feel respected by that. If you're not waiting a long time to get quorum, for those who are not familiar with the term quorum, means it's the minimum number of people you need to have in order your meeting to be official. Or it's the minimum number of party members or committee members or executive or steering committee members you need to have for your meeting to be a valid gathering of the organization. You don't want to be waiting around too long waiting for people to show up just so you can have quorum, just so you can start your meeting. It doesn't look great. For a brand new person seeing that, it's not the best first impression. So, if that means that you need to start your meeting and schedule your meeting to start at, say, 7:10 or 7:15 because you can't get access to it until 7 o'clock, then so be it, right? Work with the amount of time that you have, but the key concept, what I need you to take from this, is that you never just show up to the building and immediately start your meeting the moment that you show up. That never happens. There's always people saying hi to each other and shaking hands and, oh, I haven't seen you in so long, and oh, who has an extra pen? Who has copies of the agenda? All this stuff is great, right? All this is part of the reason that we get together face to face. But all of that stuff takes time, right? And you want to have that social aspect of your gathering, but you also want to demonstrate to the people who took the time out of their evening to show up, or day, right, that you value their time and that you are maximizing the use of their time and everyone's time gathered there. All right, so you have gotten there early, you've set up, you're checking people in, you want to have a timed agenda, right? And this is where you can actually take back a little bit time that you might have lost if check-in or registration went a little long, or if you didn't get access to the room when you were supposed to. If you include 5 minutes for introductions, depending on the size of your meeting, right? 5 minutes to go over the agenda. 5 minutes or a few minutes to assign a facilitator, a note keeper, and a timekeeper to make sure that your agenda items are on time or on schedule. If you assign times to those that are like, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. for each of those, it's probably not going to take 5 minutes to assign those roles of facilitator, note keeper, a timekeeper, especially if the chair of your committee or organization is already going to be facilitating. That's one role knocked out already. But you can get back a little bit of time if approving the agenda only takes 1 minute as opposed to 5 minutes. You can catch up some time on those agenda items. So that's a little organizer's trick, meeting planning trick. You never know. You can't rely on it because maybe an item that was supposed to be on the agenda was accidentally left off, and you might need that time to put it back on and for everyone to get on the same page and update their agendas, right? Maybe the person who was supposed to chair the meeting fell ill or had to deal with an emergency, and so you need to elect someone on the spot, or you need a volunteer on the spot. That might take a few minutes. You might need a few minutes to orient that person to what the goal of that particular meeting is. So you can't rely on it every time, but most of the time you can make up some ground that you lost if setup went a little longer than you wanted through those opening agenda items. So that brings me to what I knew would be my third point, and that is timekeeping for how individuals participate in your meeting. Now, this can be a little unfamiliar, right, for people. And what I'm talking about is frequently in larger meetings, I would say in any meeting of more than 5 people, and maybe even with 5 people, but definitely anything with more than 5 people, you want to actually recommend that people try to keep their questions and their comments and their contributions during the meeting to a certain amount of time. Maybe it's 2 minutes, maybe it's 3 minutes, maybe it's a minute, right? 2 minutes is usually pretty good. And we're Greens, right? We believe in free speech, we believe in free expression, and so people might ask, well, why do you want to put a clock on people as they are talking during a meeting? The point is not to pressure people or to make people feel uncomfortable. We do want spaces where people feel like they are comfortable sharing their opinions. However, there's a lot of different kinds of people in the world, and some of those people like to talk at length during meetings. And many of those people are involved in politics, especially electoral politics. And while we really value what they have to say, those people have a lot to contribute, and they're very valuable, and we want them in our party. But we also need to help them be mindful of how much time they are taking up during the meeting, because we have business that we need to get to, and we have other people in the room who want to speak. And so when you're taking what we call a stack, generally, which is a list of people who have indicated that they want to speak during the meeting, usually by raising a hand, as you're moving through the stack of people, you want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk. And in a meeting of I'd say larger than 5 people, that usually means that some people are going to need to refrain from speaking as long as they might have if they were just left to their own devices. And again, we're not trying to be rude. We're not trying to pressure people. We don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. We're trying to create a space where everyone feels comfortable to share. And not everyone is equally comfortable talking in a room full of people, especially when you're talking about decisions or policies or platform discussions that are very important to people, that people feel very intensely about. Some people are just shy, and we want to make sure that those people have a chance to speak. The people who, when there's a call for questions, they're not the first people to raise their hand up, right? They might want to take a little time to think about really what their question is or what their contribution is. Or they just might need a little time to work up their courage. And that's okay, right? Those people shouldn't be kept from participating just because they're not a loud mouth like me, right? So that's why number one, we take stack. And I want to do an episode in the future where we actually run through how to run a progressive stack and how to facilitate a conversation in that method. But also that ahead of time, before the conversation starts, we set a reasonable time limit for contributions that is in proportion to the number of people in the room who might want to contribute, and also to the amount of time that has been allotted to this topic on the agenda. So if you've got a topic on the agenda that is set for 30 minutes, then you can grant people 3 minutes or so if it's a deep topic that you're doing a deep dive on. Now, if you've got 100 people in the room, you can't grant each person 3 minutes, right? So if you make that judgment, and you can come to that agreement yourselves as a room. There will possibly be someone in the room who says, hey, we're all just friends here, right? We don't need to set a time limit on discussion. That person is 90% of the time the reason why you need to set a time limit on discussion, right? And we love that person. And that person is a valuable member of our party, and we respect that person. But in this instance, we need that person to agree to a ground rule such that everyone in the room has the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way. So, gauge it by how many people are in the room who you think might want to discuss. What is the kind of the intensity of the subject matter? Is this controversial subject matter? And also how much time you have allotted this item in the agenda. And you got to have your items, your agenda items, your discussion items be timed in order to make an informed estimate for how much you want to let people speak, at a time during discussion. And hey, if there aren't that many people who want to speak, then you can always grant to extend time or whatever. Someone can move to extend time, or the facilitator can. It can be at the facilitator's prerogative to extend someone's time if they are being efficient, but just what they're trying to communicate is a little bit complex. Then and it's maybe they have a special relationship or a special connection to the item that's being discussed. Then they can always be granted a little bit of extra time. But again, you don't want to have a meeting where someone who's new that has shown up is watching one or two people just monopolize the entire meeting. You don't want new people to have that experience because they're going to think, oh, this is just a talk shop, right? This is just a place for people to bloviate their opinions. And it's going to be hard to get that person back to another meeting. It's going to be hard to increase their engagement in your county organization or your committee. So that, gets to the heart of why we want to have kind of timed speaking limits. The way that you can go about that in practice is, number one, you want to have a dedicated timekeeper. It's not a great idea for your facilitator / stack keeper. Well, if your facilitator is different than your stack keeper, then the stack keeper could also keep time. And again, I'm going to go more into depth on facilitation and stack in another episode. But generally speaking, it's good to have someone who's just focused on keeping time for individual speakers. And let's say you set 2 minutes as a speaking limit, then what you want to do is give people a signal at 1 minute and then at 30 seconds that their time is running out. And that gives people a chance to prioritize what they want to say and to wrap up what they're saying. If you give people 3 minutes, then again, you could give them a note at 1 minute and then again at 30 seconds, or you could even give them a note at 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, etc. And this is a great skill for all Greens to have, especially Greens who eventually want to do any kind of on-camera role in front of the media or in talking to reporters. Being able to communicate what you have to say in 2 minutes or less is an important skill politically. Being able to communicate the essence of what you have to say in that time period. And again, we don't do it to make people feel uncomfortable. We do this to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. And the key to getting your group to agree to this is that you need to be consistent about it, and you need to set the expectation ahead of time, right? What can really rub people the wrong way is if you start discussion, and let's say you have 10 minutes allotted to it on the agenda, and you let one person talk for 5 minutes, and then you have 4 or 5 other people who have their hands raised who want to talk on the matter, and now you're saying, sorry, we need to limit contributions to 30 seconds or to 1 minute. Well, that's just not fair, right? Because one person got to speak for 5 minutes, or 2 people got to speak for 3 minutes each. So you got to set that expectation ahead of time and be consistent and fair about how it's applied. And that way people get a sense that, okay, it's not that they're just like trying to shut me up, right? They are, again, trying to create a space where everyone has a chance to participate if they want to do so. All right, so we've talked about how to get your meeting to start on time, which means getting to your meeting early to set up and having access to your space early to set up. We've talked about having a timed agenda, and that helps people set their expectation for how the meeting is going to go. Also, it provides the very important role of making sure that items are only as long as they need to be. The meetings are like catfish. they will grow to the size of whatever the environment will accommodate, especially if we're talking about time, right? If you allow people to debate the background color of a flyer for 20 minutes, they will use that 20 minutes to debate just that one thing. So, but if you set a time limit of that for 5 minutes, then they'll get the decision done in 5 minutes. That's the beauty of it. If you don't set a time limit for an agenda item, who knows how long it could take. But 9 times out of 10, if you set a time limit for that, be it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, you will come to a conclusion, to a productive conclusion in that time you have set. It's just a weird thing about human behavior and about human groups. Now, you don't want to use the agenda times as a means of control, right? You don't want to use it as a means to minimize or marginalize topics that you as the facilitator or convener don't want to talk about. That's bad. Don't do that. You need to talk to your fellow steering committee members or your fellow committee members or your fellow Greens about the agenda ahead of time, about the agenda times ahead of time, to make sure that everyone who needs to be there for that agenda item will be present in the meeting, and to get a sense of, is this a fair allotment of time for this agenda item during the meeting? And people need to agree to those times at the beginning of the meeting. People might have a different sense of how long something will take than you do, and you need to be open to that. You need to be flexible about that. You don't want to use the time of the agenda as a way to silence people or to censor people. And the way to do that, again, is by being consistent and by being upfront with people ahead of time about what the time limits that you would like to set for each item, and getting their agreement on that, and any amendments that people might want to put forward. And so that takes care of agenda times. And then we talked about time limits for speakers. And again, you want to set that expectation before discussion starts. You want to set those time limits in proportion to the amount of time that the agenda item has, and also to the number of people in the room who might want to speak on it. And you need to be consistent about enforcing those times, ideally with a dedicated timekeeper who is letting people know how much time they have left through a inobtrusive signal, and then letting people know when they need to end so that you can move on to the next speaker. So those are my tips for managing time at and during meetings. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments of this Facebook video. You can also email me at michael@gpny.org. Again, that's michael@gpny.org. My name is Michael O'Neill. I am your friendly Green Party of New York staff organizer. This has been How Greens Get Things Done. Thank you so much for watching, for liking, and for sharing. I want to see you next week at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to be talking about updates on our campaign for New York Health, and also what you can do as a Green for that campaign. It's the campaign to get single-payer universal health care passed in New York State. It's a statewide initiative for GPNY this year. It's something we're hoping that every candidate, every campaign, every county, whether you've got 100 Greens together or you're out there by yourself, you all can participate, and we're going to have some tips and tools for you about how to do that, and I look forward to speaking with you then. This has been How Greens Can Get Things Done, and I want you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye.